Did you see where the faith healing bill died in committee in Boise? Was a discussion on our program yesterday. Steve Millington was in the studio with us, and we had quite a bit of reaction from folks who were tuning in. And I wanted to point out as well, it wasn't the only bill that went away, at least for this year, at least for this session. Not that there'd be a special session later, not likely, unless something really important came along. But these bills won't likely see the light of day again until at least next year, if any time even soon beyond that. But I have this. It says an Idaho House panel has spiked a proposed amendment, a couple of different bills, as I mentioned, that went away to expand the rights of crime victims and their families. We spent a lot of time on this particular bill yesterday, the crime victim expansion with prosecuting attorney Grant Loebs. And what would have happened if this had been actually adopted and Governor Otter had signed it, it would not have become necessarily immediate. It would have gone to voters in the state as an amendment to the state constitution to expand crime victims' rights. The reason it died in committee yesterday is some committee members were concerned that we just don't have enough in the way of resources in the justice system to be tracking everyone down to constantly notify them of every parole hearing that a violent criminal may be up for. We try to do that right now, but the fact of the matter is, we mentioned it yesterday. What happens if a victim moves away to Arizona and then you have to send someone to track them down because you can't necessarily find them online or on a telephone? Or some of these things would be difficult to do. So some folks in Boise yesterday said, you know what? It sounds like a great idea, but we're trying to save money here, and this will cost us in the long run. Now, a couple of other issues too that took place, as I mentioned, faith healing. This had been a huge debate going on for, gosh, number of weeks in Boise, and it's come up before. It centers on some people in the state of Idaho who believe that they should rely on simply prayer if you have a sick child, you don't go see a doctor. The other side of this argues, and we had a caller yesterday that said God gave us the minds to come up with a lot of good medical cures in this day and age. Go see the doctor. But some people in some churches still rely, and they leave it in God's hands. And Governor Otter had said when he was in Hanson for his well, I called it a town hall. It's technically called Capitol for a day, but when he was visiting there at the high school last Friday, he had said that this he believed was the most contentious issue of all that we're dealing with in Boise right now, because you pit your First Amendment liberty to freedom of religion, and if your religion says we'll rely on prayer, and then you go against the medical community, somebody was going to be angry when this thing, and you're going to have people on the medical side who are not happy with it as we speak, because their argument is, and some people even, I guess is it Don Foreman? He's a newly elected state senator from Lewiston. He's the fellow who proposed a bill a couple of months ago that would outlaw abortion in Idaho. And he was doing that as a means of trying to set up a test case that would go to the U.S. Supreme Court in Washington to challenge Roe v. Wade, which could end up in the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Now, people said at the time his bill doesn't stand a chance of getting anywhere, but the reason he introduced it was he's thinking that long game, that long-term game where you would be able to challenge something, let it go to the Supreme Court, and let the chips fall where they may. He actually supported the medical side of the community on this versus faith healing, even though he's a very devout man, because he argues, and some of his colleagues, there were a handful of them, Burt Brackett was also, I think, among them, their argument being if you're pro-life, you're not only pro-life when that baby's in the womb, you're pro-life when that child is 7, 8, or 9 years old. And so even if a family says we're going to just simply rely on God's will and we're going to rely on prayer, if the kid has scarlet fever, then we should dang well be looking out for their life and getting them to the hospital. That was the argument from that group, but only 11 senators in committee supported that notion. So that bill went down to defeat as well. And then on road funding, we had a little bit of a discussion about this yesterday, and it's come up before. The newspaper out of Missoula this morning had a story. I happened to see it. Well, I don't read the actual newspaper from Missoula, but I saw it online. The recent warm weather we had across the region has caused, again, a lot of flooding. And a lot of roads in western Montana and in eastern Idaho and northern Idaho are washing away again because of the thaw, which will back off in the next few days because temperatures are going to moderate a little bit. We're going to be a little bit cooler, so there won't be quite as much runoff taking place. But that underscores the need for road repairs. And anybody who's been driving Route 30, whether you're out in that area around Buell or if you're out in the area around Burley, you know that that road's a mess. And it's not the only one. And in other parts of the state, I was up in Bellevue the other day and I was on some of the side streets. They're rutted like the moon surface. Something needs to be done. And I think I argued in a newspaper column some weeks ago, and I've argued it as well on air, that if government takes good care of the roads, a lot of these other issues will fall into place. Roads mean good commerce. Commerce means some revenue. So it spurs tax revenue. It helps fill government coffers, and it helps pay for other government programs. Brackett had actually suggested that we should have some bonds that would be floated and do $530 million of road repairs. Now, a year ago, it was said that we needed $250,000 in rehab right away, and they only allocated $91 million for that last year. It was one of the reasons the gas tax went up, if you recall, a year ago in September, I think it was. However, I'll point out that it's not going to raise nearly enough money, so they're trying to find individual ways to fund all of the road rehab that we need in the state. This comes from the Associated Press. Idaho state senators have whittled down a $530 million transportation funding plan with hopes of getting it through both chambers before legislators adjourn, which will likely be Friday this week. The latest transportation plan is now roughly $320 million, primarily by using bonds to pay for new road projects and repay it with federal highway payments. Now, bonds are you're borrowing. You're borrowing the money. And the hope is you will get that federal highway money. On the other hand, last week, President Trump's people presented a budget to Congress in Washington calling for an end to CDBG, Community Development Block Grants, which governments have used for many, many years around the country, not just at the state level, but on the local level. You get a large piece of the pie from the federal government. The federal government sends you just a check. And it's not designated for a water system or for a highway system or for planting of trees or maintenance or anything else. It's just sent to the local government. And then the local government makes up its own decisions. It makes its own mind, if you will, about where the money's going to be spent. Well, the Trump administration says that program needs to be gutted just to save money because a government $20 trillion in debt on the national level, officially, can't continue to afford to do this. Can I note, too, as well, we heard that the federal government, this shows you where media dropped the ball on this. We heard the federal government was going to be cutting money for Meals on Wheels. Turns out that's not true. Mick Mulvaney, the budget director for the White House, as he was explaining the cuts to the Community Development Block Grant Program, was trying to use some examples of where government money goes and how it's used around the country, and he referenced Meals on Wheels. But the federal government essentially doesn't fund the Meals on Wheels program. That's more so done on state and local levels. So media immediately jumped up and down and said, Donald J. Trump is taking food out of the mouths of hungry old people. He's going to kill them all off early so he can save us a few bucks, I guess. It wasn't true. And instead of media coming out and saying, we apologize for besmirching the president, who we don't like, media simply has let the story drop, which seems to be the rationale any day. Well, we buried an apology on page A17, a correction, if you will. Who reads page A17? Right. But it's their excuse. So when it comes to road repair in Idaho, and this doesn't necessarily mean that this bill is going to pass, it's just been reduced, if you will. It's a good way to put it. The new plan also removes the exemption on sales tax for road materials. The Senate made the tweaks yesterday. Legislative leaders say they hope to adjourn by Friday, and they hope that the House will find this bill to be a little bit more palatable. Is that a good explanation? In other words, the House will now say, all right, 320 million versus 530 million. I'm in. We have a caller with us. A telephone number to reach our program, 736-0300, 736-0300. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. You're up next. You're on the air.
Yeah, good morning, Bill. The argument on the abortion that you were saying they were using in the legislature there, that if we want to save children from being murdered in the mama's womb, so therefore we've got to allow this government to take care of them. That doesn't work. Why shouldn't we, if we want to save them, let Jesus take care of them in the womb and take them out of the womb, and why shouldn't he take care of them after they're out of the womb?
That was the
You know,
argument I think the governor was making last week, and I think some of those people heard him and realized he might not approve this bill if they passed it, so they decided with the limited time they have to shelve it.
Okay. Uh, Also, Pope John Paul II stated in 1993, he said, "Woe unto us if we don't succeed in defending life." And that's what we were looking right in the face of with Hillary Clinton. She was telling us all the things that she was going to do, all the wars she was going to start, and everything.
Yeah, we had an answer to our prayers when she wasn't elected. I'll make that point. I'll second that. Thank you much for the call, sir. 918. Quick note, short break coming up in a few minutes. Parliament has shut down in England. There is a bridge closed down over the Thames River. Possibly, I don't know, but possibly there has been a terrorist attack. Again, when you open your borders to the third world and invite people in who are trying to destroy your culture, these things happen. That is speculation on my part at the moment. Speculation, but just to share that with you, you may have heard it already in our 9 o'clock newscast. If indeed it's a terrorist attack, I want to pass that along to some judges in Hawaii and at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals this morning. Also wanted to mention our friends at Western Visions. Western Visions, Inc. I got a chance to tour a facility that they're renovating, and they've got to be pretty close to being done now over in Cassia County a couple of weeks ago. And the renovations that are being done are really spectacular to look at. They'll do a home repair, a whole home repair, or renovation, that is. They'll do a bathroom or bathrooms, or just a kitchen renovation, updating it, bringing it into the modern era. And I wanted to point out, too, as well, Western Visions, Inc. will work with you as an individual. You won't be just signing a contract and then coming back 3 months later and saying, well, oh, gee, this is what I wanted. They'll work with you on a daily basis, consulting with you throughout the entirety of the project. And if you'd like to learn more, in fact, this day and age, wouldn't it be great to have somebody doing that in most businesses? In this day and age, that is a rather rare service that is provided. Go to the website, western-visions.com. That's western-visions.com. And you can learn more and perhaps give them a call, because it's that time of year when people are thinking it's drying out. It's time to have that renovation done. More coming up in just a moment on KLIX. I never would have thought it years ago. People on the left claim that Americans aren't bright enough to pay attention to the world around them. But I made a comment on social media yesterday during the Gorsuch testimony. I was watching it at home. Yes, yes, yes. I lead a very exciting life. The number of people who chimed in and were watching it as well, friends of mine, I was amazed. So many other things, and it was a beautiful day here yesterday, but so many other things people could have been doing, and all over the country. But they were transfixed by what was taking place in the U.S. Senate. And frankly, look, compared to NASCAR, it's a little bit boring. But there was no NASCAR yesterday, and NASCAR. Well, if your name is Bush, you're still being haunted every week by this Joey Logano fellow. In Washington, I think Neil Gorsuch is being haunted by the comedian Al Sharpton, who claims to be a U.S. senator. I want to talk a little bit about that coming up in just a moment. Wanted to also say thank you for listening to our program today. But if you're having difficulty hearing this show, maybe it's time to think about getting your hearing checked. And we recommend Mount Harrison Audiology in Rupert. Why would you choose Mount Harrison Audiology? Independence. Mount Harrison Audiology is the only independent, locally owned hearing health care practice in southern Idaho, and it means more choices for treatment than just one brand and lower cost. Trust your hearing to a certified audiologist. You can call Mount Harrison Audiology for your appointment today. The number is 312-0957. That's 208-312-0957. 924 on Top Story with Bill Colley, and we're at 45. Not likely going to get a lot warmer anytime soon. Call the weather the doldrums for the next week to 10 days. Not terribly chilly, not terribly sunny, but very much March-like. And going into April, we'll probably see some of the same. Neil Gorsuch testifying yesterday during a hearing. They're on day 3 of that today. He was complimented by Ben Sasse, the U.S. Senator from Nebraska. Sasse's wife had tweeted asking why it was Gorsuch never needed to go to the bathroom. He was there for about 11 hours. Was it 11 hours yesterday? It was a long, long day, and well, he's obviously in very, very good shape. The Democrats are just trying to kill him with some sort of bladder infection, I suppose. This is Gorsuch responding to a question by Dianne Feinstein. She, of course, is a liberal U.S. Senator from San Francisco. And this has been the big thing. They're arguing in Washington, he's against the little guy. Justice sometimes helps the little guy out, but justice is about the law. And the law respects the rich folks as much as the poor folks. So this is Gorsuch responding to some of her claims. Take a listen. And I think she was left sitting there with a hemina.
And if you want cases where I've ruled for the little guy as well as the big guy, there are plenty of them, Senator. The Ute Indian tribe.
Would you be willing to submit some of them?
Oh,
it's
goodness.
Hard to read 2,700 cases.
I'll name a bunch of them right now.
Trans Am.
I'm sorry, Senator. Of course, Ute 5 and 6, Fletcher, the Rocky Flats case, which vindicated the rights of people who have been subject to pollution by large companies in Colorado, uranium pollution. I point you to the magnesium case, similar pollution case in the Salt Lake City area. Colorado's effort with renewable energy upheld that. Or versus City of Albuquerque, involving pregnancy discrimination in the police department in Albuquerque. WD Sports, a discrimination claim. Casey, Energy West, Crane. Simpson versus CU, involving young women who had been harassed by the football team. AM versus AM, Browder, Sutton. I can give you a long list.
And we'll find them and we'll read them.
And Senator, the bottom line, I think, is that I'd like to convey to you from the bottom of my heart is that I'm a fair judge. And I think if you ask people in the 10th Circuit, is he a fair judge? You're going to get the answer that you got yesterday from both Senator Bennett and Senator Gardner and from General Cotchill. And the same answer you got from Senator Allard and Senator Salazar 10 years ago. And Senator, I can't guarantee you more than that, but I can promise you absolutely nothing.
Now, I was listening to that after he rattled off all of those cases, and then he should have just said, would you like more? We could be here for 16 hours if you like. I can give you more. At that point, she was ready to throw in the towel. Al Franken, who's the senator, you've got Feinstein, Franken, and I guess a combination would be Frankenstein. Al Franken, the comedian from Minnesota, they went back to this because she'd brought it up the day before. Story about a truck driver. The truck driver had problems with his brakes. Was worried that he was driving a dangerous rig. He pulled over. He called his bosses. They said, don't leave the trailer alone, because he could unhitch the trailer and drive away in the truck. And so he sat there and fell asleep apparently, and then he got a phone call on his cell phone from a brother and realized that he thought he was potentially entering hypothermia. So he decided, instead of waiting for someone to come out from the company to check out the brake situation, he detached the trailer and he drove away. He got fired from his job. Franken was pointing out that Gorsuch sided with the employer in a lawsuit. Now, if the guy was working at will, and you know what that means, right? An at-will state, or if you're in a situation like that, then you can't just walk away from the job and expect that you're going to keep it. At will means they don't have to have a reason for firing you. But according to Franken, government should be your mommy and daddy, and the judges should, you got to hire him again because you were mean. He was cold. I posted that story yesterday on Facebook, and a preacher friend of mine responded and said, the guy had a cell phone. Why didn't he call the cops? Because if it wasn't a terribly busy night, they would have come out, helped him out. Maybe he could have sat in the back of the squad car, heated squad car, until somebody came out from the company to check the truck. But he didn't do that. See, this is where the difference between Democrats and Republicans. Democrats still believe government is your mommy and daddy, and that this guy left the scene and left this truck with an expensive load behind on the side of the road, that someone should force the employer to hire him back. But this is not about redistribution in your life. The fact of the matter is, a judge has to follow the law, and the judge said, well, it said it was at will. That's his job. 9:30, Bill Colley with you. It's 45 on KLIX.